All right. I'm not sure what's going on. It might be that my internet connection here doesn't have isn't fast enough or reliable enough today, or maybe it's that my video settings were too ambitious for streaming. I've only used OBS for recording for the last couple of years on this computer, so I've tried turning it down. If I are there any other recommendations from people who all know more about successful streaming to Twitch without things failing all the time, I'm open to it. Otherwise, if this happens again, I'll probably just call the stream tonight. I'll probably just call the stream off and hope that this does not persist when I plan on streaming regularly later. But this was just kind of a bonus for fun thing, and either way, I'd like to make progress on this project. So if it's going to keep failing rather than fighting it, I might just work on this privately instead. But for now, let's try to continue and see if it holds up this time. I've turned it down significantly. Cool. So something I could do is I could have the when I go to build the quest, I could just have it run. So if we go bin jams the quest, what's the name of that? Bin jams the quest bake fragments sh. So now if I hit F1, it'll add them in. So if I were to go over here and or let's say I rename this file to zippy, right? Rename this file to zippy.c, and I hit F1. That shouldn't build. If the script ran, then this should not say QUS. Okay, so it's including zippy, which is, oh, wait, no, yeah, it actually builds. No, yeah, it's correct that builds, but it's surprising. So the only time that this would fail to build is if I referenced this function in code before here, like before here. And the way that can happen is that the code inside here, it references itself in lots of complicated ways. All of the functions that are in these little story fragments can reference all the other story fragment functions, which is part of the reason why I need this extra hack, because C does not make something like that super easy to maintain automatically. This might be a case where it really would make a difference to how I could use the language. But also, this use of the language is still would still be a temporary measure, right? The long-term thing here would be to build a content engine that matches the capabilities of a story engine like this, a story writing engine for this kind of game would have all of the solutions built in better than any programming language could, or any general purpose programming language would. Anyway, so far the stream is still going. So we're 4 more minutes in. That's good. Let's go. So we got zippy over here is wrong. Rename that to the Halls of Madness. Build again. Still works. We pop in over here. These are correct now. Oh, very good. Very good. That's the kind of meta programming that I like. 5 seconds, no new dependencies, no new compilation units introduced, just pure code generation. So the reason I'm doing this is I have that no up path. I'll go ahead and make sure that that's all working. So if you say I come here, I go to the dungeon, I enter the dungeon, dead end. I didn't build out any more story for that path. Very well. Now, say you came to the Halls of Madness. Let's write that part. Now, what did I did not write anything for this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to describe very briefly this piece and leave it to fill out more detail here. But I want to keep moving and sort of sketching right now. Okay, I'm going to do that, language check. I'm actually going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to say, let's talk about all the text entirely underneath the if of the language check so I can massage the prose a little bit better. Right, maybe we won't do that right now, but I think that will just be a better policy. Stream is still up. We made it 9 minutes. Okay. Okay. Progress. Wait. My preview doesn't say that I'm up. OBS says that I'm up, but my preview doesn't. Is there anyone out there? I can't tell. Okay, I'm good. Well, it's been a mess. Every time I've gone down, the Twitch preview has still shown that my stream was up, and only OBS showed that I was down. And this time OBS showed that I was up, but Twitch showed that I was down. So I shudder to think of what people who do this full time must go through to deal with this system. This is Maybe I'm just behind on the good ways to do it, but wow, that's a lot. Okay, so actually, I'm gonna fix this now. I keep getting pulled into the writing. Writing is so time consuming in this project. Text inscribed along the top of the arch in ancient Hebraic reads, there's text is inscribed along the top. There we go. Okay. All right. So here we're doing, you came across another archway similar in design to the surface entrance of the dungeon. No. No. I'm gonna use the exact same text here for now. And what I'll do is I'll probably build like a progressive thing where as you encounter writing that you don't recognize on the tops of arches, there'll be like a progression so that it starts with this sentence and then it simplifies and simplifies and then it gets down to like some base. There's writing on the arch that you cannot read, right? It like simplifies as you get familiar with that piece of the element of the story. It's sort of, you know, I feel like you can see this in books a lot where the first time in a special key idea comes up in the narrative, it gets elaborated with a descriptive sentence, and then as it becomes a more familiar element, it becomes more and more condensed. You're familiar with the description of it, and so the short description is just a reference to your pre-existing knowledge rather than a full-on description. So I'm not going to just attach the description of the event to where you are seeing it. The fact that these are similar events means I want to generate them. The fact that these are like similar events means I want to generate them across, you know, you're always going to see the outside entrance first, but you might go back outside before you find this Halls of Madness entrance. And so you want, so I want the progression to be independent of, like, tracked by an independent state, right? That's what I want. This part I'll just reuse verbatim. Nice. Okay, so if I play this, I go for Amulet of Yendor, go to the dungeon, enter the dungeon. There, I made it to the Halls of Madness screen. Now, the next piece there gets interesting. So let's talk about how that would work. When you have an encounter, this will be a part of what I call an encounter system in the game. When you have an encounter, you will get certain options that are determined by that encounter, but those options that you get will be drawn from a set, will include options that are drawn from a set of common familiar ones. So in this case, the options are you can enter the Hall of Madness, the Halls of Madness, or you can continue exploring and then it'll generate effects. But that continuing exploring might expand out. Like continue exploring might not be a button. How do I want to describe this? It might be that continue exploring is a higher level concept that I invoke from here, from this code right here, that could mean a button, or it could mean that let me back up and explain sort of the arc of exploring a roguelike dungeon, right? And how your options change over time. Early on, you're sort of just exploring, uncovering new areas. As you start to know where things are, you start routing more intentionally. As you start thinking things like, okay, I've done as much as I can do here. I think the best option now is to go back to this place and finish this branch of the dungeon, because I am prepared to handle everything in there except the boss at the bottom of that dungeon branch, and I don't want to go to the other branch that I left uncleared because I think that I'm not prepared for this monster that lives there, right? So having some idea of what's in the various parts of the game and what you're prepared to deal with and what you're not prepared to deal with, you make a decision about where to go. So I want some kind of mechanism that like lets you say, here's an encounter, and after an encounter, return to the player what kinds of decisions make narrative sense given their progression state, right? Early on in the process of exploring a dungeon, generally you explore your exploration choices involve what manner of exploration you're going to do: thorough, fast, stealthy, something like that. But as it moves on and on, it starts to get to be like you can do exploring new areas if there are still unexplored areas, or you can get to navigate to specific landmarks that you have sort of learned about. And so I want there to be a sort of expansion of traveling intentionally, and also a diminishing of exploration because you've explored enough. You just haven't completed certain things. When you go to an incomplete area, then your options for exploration expand again, and your options for specific navigation become basically retreat back up, right? You always have this, in addition to exploring, you always usually have retreat back to known territory. So I want to be able to say from lots of different places, hey, this is an encounter where your options are, these specific things that are involved in the encounter, enter the Halls of Madness, or or if you don't enter the Halls of Madness, in this case, the other option is explore/travel. It's like the free action. It's the free action travel category. It's the movement category, right? It's the navigation category. And so the options of navigation that make sense are the options of navigation that make sense through a narrative interface. But that might not be as easy as saying, give them this one button, right? It might need to be a little more procedural than that. So for now, I'm going to give them a single button, but I'm going to mark that as a spot where I'm going to replace it with a more rich system later. this might be enough detail. Okay, so you come to the Halls of Madness. You've walked into them. What's that like? The Halls of Madness. Well, we're gonna have the very first thing we're gonna have is yeah, we're gonna have more details here, but the main thrust of it's gonna be you enter in, and we're gonna have to do a game check. Now, in the vision of all this would do more. Just like this language thing might expand out to a whole language subsystem. This here could expand out to a whole knowledge subsystem, what clues you've picked up, and you might be able to get them through other means. Right now, I don't even have the clues. We're skipping over all that, so it's just going to be if you're on the Amulet of Yender path, then you have access. The cool evolution of this would be check and see if you have the 3 clues for this check. And the direct way of getting those is to be on the Amulet of Yender path, but that doesn't necessarily mean the game would forever function that way. It could have the quirk that an adventurer transitions from one path to another by fiddling with the state enough, right? If the game's all one big interconnected state, you could start off as someone who's not on the Amulet of Yender path, and yet you pick up the clues through roundabout ways and hack your way through, and then you get this cool thing where you start out, the game initially presents itself as like the other paths exist as sort of tutorial or short game modes or alternative objectives, and then the Amulet of Yender is like the long game mode. But then you can flip it around and say, wait, what if I want to really push myself to master the details of the simulation of this game world by ascending as one of the other types of play modes, right? Then I feel like that'd be the kind of dynamic that would be neat to enable. But for now, the check just looks like this. Help me understand, did we not build QUS Halls of Madness? Oh, I didn't actually fix the functioning yet. Okay, what's the problem? Ah, this file's in the wrong path. Yet another way in which the story engine that I've hacked together so far is very poor. Oops, these need to be marked as no wrap. so that their spaces, they don't get split along spaces. Amulet of Yender. Go to the dungeon. Enter the dungeon. Okay. I made the wrong call. I said that the written texts should be smaller. They should actually be bigger by a little bit. That would make that would be better. Yeah. Cool. True Nemesis UK, hello, welcome. How is it going? Alrighty, I need to do the game check now. If we have the Halls of Madness clues, put it here. Otherwise, we let's say if we don't have the clues, we'll write that part first. Okay, what do we want to say? We're trying to tell the player they are in this labyrinth that seems to defy logical space. They move forward in a systematic way and find themselves getting caught in loops and ending up in locations where they did not mean to end up. So I want to summarize that in a sentence or two here. Ah, you're learning C. Are you already familiar with programming in other contexts? Or and if so, what kind of programming have you done before? I'm doing pretty good. All right. I want to end the paragraph there. My internet is still up. I'm still streaming. Good. I had an interruption in my music, so I was worried that was an internet down, but maybe this time it was just my music streaming and not my outgoing video stream. Okay. Yeah, so right here, I'm going to give the player a choice. This guy. Okay. So this is going to be the equivalent to if you had done a continue exploring here, right? It's like either way, this is giving you the same set of options, right? Now the question is, how am I going to present that? If it's a button you click that then takes you to a screen that's like, all right, you need to decide how to explore what to do next in the dungeon. Then that's just like a separate screen that these would both be linking to, right? But what I think I'll do to implement that maybe is to attach a payload that says something like that. Like instead of just transitioning to a specific screen, I'm gonna do this as I don't know. We'll fill this in soon. Okay, that's what happens if you go in there as someone who doesn't pass the Halls of Madness check. Right? Now, something I did before was I said that when you enter the dungeon, if you... Yeah, we begin dungeon floor. I'm going to have everybody... I'm gonna stop doing it this way. I'm gonna have everyone go straight to the Halls of Madness entrance, so I can test that out. It's framed by a stone archway. Writing decorates the top of the arch in a language that you do not recognize. You come across an open doorway framed by a stone arch. Writing decorates the top of the arch in a language that you do not recognize. That's going to become progressive sentence right there. Through the door, you see a long hallway with countless offshoots. What do you do? Enter the door. Halls and their offshoots. Right, so we want to write, let's write for the situation where the player does pass the check. So they have the clues. This is like in Legend of Zelda game, when you walk into an area and you have to move up, down, left, and right. You have to take the paths out of the current area in the right way, or it just keeps looping you back around to where you started. The only way to get through the haunted forest or something is to know the special magic path. Except in this game, you don't say north, south, east, and west. You just either you know it or you don't. It's a property of your character. And so this is describing to you, the player, that you're in the first situation where you haven't figured out how to get through. Now, we're going to be in the situation where the player comes in knowing the paths already. So yeah, let's just stick with that and then have a second paragraph for describing the end of the path. So what's at the end of the path? Let's take a look again at my story plan. So once you get to the end of this, we're just going to skip, actually I put that in, we're just going to skip the Sentinel entirely and just skip straight to, there's a door that takes you to the next phase. What if I just didn't bother with that problem? Now that I think about it. What do you do? Technically, this should go through a language check. All right, let's do that. Okay. So, if I play Amulet of Yendor, I go to the dungeon. I'll put that in a no wrap. Anytime I put something in writing, I want it to be no wrapped so you can read it without... Because when it wraps on your screen, but it's not wrapped in the world of your imagination, right? You have a sort of a hopefully you have a theater of the mind kind of experience going on, and then you read that your character finds some writing above a doorway or on a wall or in a note that is supposed to be quite short, and then on your screen it wraps. I feel like something about that just snaps me right out of that theater of mind for a moment, and I am, usually the writing on your screen is meant to tell you stuff, but once in a while it's meant to represent writing in the world that you're imagining, and in those cases it really needs to match your expectation for layout and appearance a little more closely. That's why changing the font still seems like a good idea for anything that's supposed to be written. I might also say, like, since these over here, this piece of writing is in a sort of magical glyph instead of carved into stone, that it might deserve a different font and color than the other writing, right? For the same reason. But, yeah, we need to make sure that this gets marked no wrap. Enter the dungeon. Similarly, I'd kind of like it if what do you do never wraps. That's just because it's got a style, like it's got a stylistic pop to it. So when it wraps, it sort of looks wrong. I think I got them all. Dungeon entrance. And again, enter the door. You come to an open, tracing out the winding route that you piece together from the guiding stones in the dungeon. See, with an important aspect to a game like this, if you were making an engine for it, is you would definitely want a what you see is what you get editor. So you could just be playing it, exploring it, and then stop there and go, this sentence here isn't quite right. Click and drag, highlight it, retype it, save, keep playing. It's definitely important to... It definitely would make a big difference on the scope of things you could handle. Enter the shimmering door. Return to the dungeon. Okay. So that's what it looks like if I get this far as a archaeologist. Let's go in as a thief. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that I don't say what do you do if there's only going to be one option. Right. For now, that means this guy's out. Okay. Let's keep going. So the goal here is to sketch out the trunk of the story, right? So to do that, I've skipped to this part. I skipped to this part. When you enter, you're entering into the area where you find the Amulet of Yendor. That's the quest you are on. So let's skip to this part where you find it and you take it. Yeah, this will just be a change fragment type. Here's the alive I want you to modify. And the fragment I want you to go to is Yendor, the Amulet of Yendor. I'll place that in the depths. Okay. QUS, depths, Amulet of Yendor. So there's our boilerplate. Now, if we had a more sophisticated system, something I would start doing is I'd be like, do I refer to this area as the depths? How would I find out? Well, I do a knowledge check, and then I can go, okay, did this player, if this player reads that this is the depths at an earlier point in the story, then they have the knowledge that this is the depths. So they could learn that this is the depths by knowing how to speak this language and passing this language check and seeing it here. Or they might have learned this is called the depths from another source. Maybe they read a note or heard an adventurer somewhere else say something, right? I could start having this idea that when I come here and I go to write this, I think to myself, does the player know that they're in the depths? And so I want a way, sort of a knowledge system, to easily ask that question here in a way that even if I forget to fill it in, it makes sense to ask, right? I don't want to have to build a whole new knowledge system for every piece of knowledge in the game. I want a sort of reusable knowledge system. So how would something like that work? I don't know, but it's a thought about this. I think it would look something like this, right? I'm already introducing the idea of checks. Right now they're parameterless, but I could do player knowledge. QU game key the depths, right? And so I have this list of keywords in the game, and this is a knowledge. This is a check player knowledge, the depths. Do they know about the depths? Now this is a very simple question. It's either binary, yes or no, they do or they don't know. But it could get more interesting, like maybe this is the name, right? And so I have a way of saying, all right, whenever I want game property name, right? Does the player know the name of the depth? So we got a property list and a game key list, and we can ask, does the player know this property of this keyword? And so I could ask, do they know the depths? I could also ask if they knew the location, right? Two different questions about the depths, two different properties regarding this keyword. So maybe I don't know. That's something I might be able to. It might be nice to just be able to ask that generically and then plug in new player knowledge. So like when I come to a point like this, I don't have to think, okay, do I want to assume the player knows the name of the depths before they get here? I can instead just write the procedural code that'll do the right thing. Whether or not it's possible to take both paths doesn't have to matter too much. It can be easier to just write it both ways and be interested to find out if it does or doesn't become reachable later. I mean, if this was extremely formally structured, whether it's reachable might also be something you can check. Anyway, let's write this area, this section. Okay. I have to work myself up to do a chunk of writing without getting distracted. I have to, like, really put my head in the zone. So, you're in the area called the Depths. You find the Amulet of Yendor. The Depths are dark, except that there's this web of fibers with light pulsing through them. The Amulet of Yendor is in the center of this plane, this region, this area. It sits at the center. And you are there looking at it. It sends out these pulses through the whole thing. Still check. pulses flow down the corridors. Well, the good thing here is we've made it to almost an hour and a half now, so we have a stream. We have a stream. Um, but man, this is gonna be a lot of work. This idea, I still believe it works, but it's really hard to make progress with this tool set. I'm gonna have to. Um, I'm gonna have to buckle in a bit because it's like writing is hard enough and sucks me in every time, but then I come out and have to do the interconnections and the state management of the game simulation. The the amount of extra boilerplate it takes to make one extra interaction is a lot. It's like, let me do this part first. Let me read this as it appears on the screen. The walls and floors of this place are made of cold black stone. The space is illuminated by a web of fibers that glow and pulse with light. The pulses flow down the corridors rhythmically. You travel opposite the flow of the pulses and find that the bundle of fibers becomes thicker and brighter as you press in deeper. Eventually, this path leads you to a massive open chamber. All of the fibers come together in the center of the chamber. A brilliant jewel sits at the center, sending out the pulses of light. Yeah, so my writing is not great. This doesn't feel good. Boom, boom, take the central jewel, return to the dungeon. But the other thing is, like, look, just as I'm writing this, it immediately occurs to me, like, okay, if I want to build this out so that it's not just you reading a book, it's not just you reading a choose your own adventure, but there's more interaction, I might have the feeling that, like, okay, I might want to put space between these 2 points. I might want to have this, and then instead of saying you press on in this particular manner, you have a choice. Do you follow the pulses? What do you see when you follow the pulses? Do you follow against the pulses? Do you explore just generally? So you have like your explore options plus maybe some explore options that are defined by this pulsing light phenomenon that you witness in this area. But just to introduce that extra interaction means I need to make a new file, come up with a name for that distinguishes the first half of the interaction from the second half, which is this part, second half, and add in the extra interactions there, right? So like the amount of work it takes to take something that is a big thing and make it two smaller things that are pieces that could compose back together into the big thing, or that could introduce in-betweens or early outs or whatever other flow I want. The amount of work it takes just to transform from one arrangement to another is so much. Just even if the text writing over and over again wasn't hard, doing the code part is big and annoying and disruptive to like seeing everything here. Like if I was really writing this as a story, I would want to have this paragraph and this paragraph next to each other so that I could sort of see that the style of writing used in each and compare them with each other. If I look up earlier in my story, how did I get to Amulet of Yendor? Right, I got there from here. And look, there's more writing here. There's writing about what I could say what you see through the door here. And, or in here, right here is where we have the, like, you've successfully navigated the Halls of Madness. In the Halls of Madness, I didn't give you any separation, right? There's the Halls of Madness failure case and success case in the same spot, so that's nice. But if I end up wanting to split this out and have like progressiveness here, or the option to arrive at the Halls of Madness and use one of several different clues that you have. So right now, if you have the knowledge check, then it takes you one place. But what if there are many things hidden here? And which ones you can get to depends on which clues you found. How would I control all of that, and how would I manage the writing of that? Well, right now, I would do it by saying, like, okay, we need to build out the knowledge just better. So instead of just doing check Halls of Madness clues, we would have a more general thing about like, hey, which clues do you have? And that part of it, is just a matter of programming. But the hard part is like, how can I make it a setup where I could write all these fragments and see them all together and compare them and see how they're going to stitch together, right? And have that still, like, I still need to be able to see. In fact, something else that's happening here that's annoying is that this changes of state are also separated from all of this, right? So here, the change of fragment happens by a name linkage here, and that could be a visual linkage. But, like, we have earlier at the dungeon entrance, we have this begin dungeon floor command. And whenever we do one of these game commands, we're having state control, like, updates that have to be separated out. So we've queued up the state update and linked it by name, but I would like to be in a situation where some equivalent thing happens, but that the editor can display the state change logic right there in conjunction with this. That would be an important piece of making this maximally manageable. Which is very similar to the problem you get with UI, where you kind of want the same thing, where if I were to do this, I could do this fix this by going immediate mode, I suppose, right? I could say, hey, instead of attaching payloads onto these alives, why don't we go create an alive and then go if QU fancy alive activate, and then directly call the command instead of attaching a payload, right? If I did that, then the next step, of course, would be to go into this function. If, begin dungeon floor might be a bad example because that might be one that I always want to have sort of separated, and then we get right back into you'd need a different paradigm of editing. But at the very least, that might be okay for some of these other things, like just changing which fragment you're on. We could just say, hey, I'm just going to write the change in right now. The which fragment we're applying this frame has already been fixed and won't change. We're going to get to the end of applying this fragment either way, so the change in fragment isn't going to show up in a way that matters because of the fact that we're doing it in line. And maybe similarly, things like the generative code that launches the game initially wouldn't have to be separated out in a separate command. It could just be right in line. Although, on the other hand, while it's useful to sometimes have it that way, it's also useful to sometimes have it collapsed. And I think in text code, since you can only choose one way to have it, you can't have it organized where it's simultaneously far away and shrunk up and also right in line and expanded. You can't have it both ways. So, like, you can't have that visually both ways because it's fixed what exists there in a way that doesn't allow it. So you have to pick one. And I think that since you have to pick one, having it not in line in this case is better because it's the correct executional pattern to build towards, right? The inline stuff is actually like a hack, ultimately, in my mind. It has a lot of problems when you are modifying state inline while you are using it at the same time to determine the layout of things. So, yeah, it's like, in some ways, trying to fix this in the text is probably wrong. It would really just be better to wait until I was doing something more dedicated to this kind of programming. Anyway, back to filling this stuff in. I was just taking a minute to get that off my chest that this is tough, one, and two, looking at all the way that's tough is gonna help me if I do design a tool for this kind of thing later. Okay, so What's the next step of the story? So let's see, I'm going to start marking off the ones I've already taken. That one's taken. That one's taken. Okay, so I have the first half of this done, but I need them to take the jewel, and then the second half can happen. So let's see, this is going to be a payload, change fragment. Here's the alive, QUS, depths, take amulet of Yendor. And I'm also going to say we need another thing to happen here, which is we need to start having a way to track what things the player has as a concept. Now, right now, I don't have an inventory system or like an item system. I don't have any way to say like there's a list of items they have. So what I'm going to do is just say we have a list of booleans for quest items that you might have. And so this is going to go set state. Has Amulet of Yendor, gets set to true. Okay. And writing again. So, what are we writing this time? The player has just oh, you know what? There was one other flaw in the writing. Chamber. Okay. Need a moment to think. What am I writing here? The player has just gone up and taken the Amulet of Yendor. Immediately, the light in the fibers dims and fades, and within a few moments, the chamber is completely dark. And then the chamber is completely dark, except for the light still emanating from the amulet. As the player puts the amulet around their neck, a brilliant flash announces the arrival of creatures from another plane who have come to stop you, the player, from using the amulet. And cue chase sequence. Except this time it's told through narrative instead of through a tactical grid-based interface. Okay. All right, so this is also a good opportunity to say, like, basically this is where the combat system would take over. And in this particular case, it would be a combat that is heavily geared towards creating a chase scene. So the way a combat, let's talk a little bit about how a combat system could work in a story game. If you think about a bunch of classic turn-based RPGs for this thought process, it'll help. If a lot of the times, if you have a turn-based RPG that's at least halfway good, what it will start to do is come up with interesting kinds of enemies by not by giving them different moves or different resistances, all that. That's not really where it becomes interesting. It gets a little bit interesting when they start doing things like you have an enemy who will steal from you and then run away. So it changes the tension from the usual formula. It's no longer a fight to the death. It's now you need to stop this person before they get away with your thing. They're not even going to try to hurt you, but you might not be able to stop them. And so you might lose without dying, right? You might take the L in the sense that they get your stuff. Because you simply don't have the ability to stop them from doing that, even though you might be able to beat them if it was a fight to the death, right? There's also, you need to capture something. So this is like the Pokemon twist is you can kill it or you can capture it. So there might be something like you want to capture something. Another twist that you can see is that there are these ones where a thing is not going to steal from you, but it's like ephemeral. It shows up for a moment and it's there for 2 turns and then it's going to go away. And so the reward for killing it isn't that you didn't isn't it, the attention there is down in the sense that you're not in any risk, but the difficulty can be actually way higher, right? It can be very difficult to succeed at this, but the consequences have been reduced if you fail, right? So these different like attributes, there are a couple other things you can imagine kind of fitting in there if you spend some time on it. There's enemies who blow up on you, so they self-destruct, ending the fight. But if you can't beat them before they do that, they take you down with them, or they do a lot of damage, right? Again, different ways of sort of changing what counts as taking the L from one encounter to the next. So, in a roguelike, let's take Dungeon Crawlstone Soup, for instance. When you are fleeing from the dungeon, it starts spawning in all these crazy monsters. And for the most part, the effective thing to do is to keep moving and running, but that's not to say that it's always the right thing to do. There are times when it makes sense to take one thing out because it stands, like say you have several paths that you can use to get to the next layer up. And the very shortest one has one tough enemy in the way. It can then, that kind of situation can set you up with enough tension to go, okay, do I run past it and take a bunch of hits? Do I take my do I use some of my resources to knock that thing down and take the short path, or do I take the long path? And that makes the chase more interesting, right? It's not as common that it makes sense to fight the big monsters that are spawning in themselves, but those might be the things that get in the way. And sometimes there are not too many of them happening simultaneously, and so instead of running and taking the hits, it makes sense to kill this one because you're confident you can do that before more show up, right? So I kind of want a similar thing here, but told through the structure of narrative. So it'll take you into the combat system, but combat system doesn't really mean a separation from, in a turn-based RPG, usually there's like an overworld experience and then a separate experience for turn-based combat. And in turn-based combat, you aren't simultaneously moving through the world. In something like Dungeon Crawl or NetHack or any of the other classic roguelikes, it's turn-based and you are in the world, and that's part of what makes them cool. And it's a part of what allows them to have a story like you are being chased be more interesting than it could be in turn-based combat, right? So I have a danger here that if you set up a combat system that's just like lock you in and fight this thing to the death, that those stories that are possible in a roguelike context where it makes sense to run away as fast as possible, including tactical things like the fastest way to run away is to fight through this one thing. I want to capture all of that through the interface still. I don't want to tell stories that have that structure. And so I don't want to lock in too heavily on like okay, turn-based combat has begun. I take my turn and then you take your turn and we have HP and we sit still and the world waits for us to finish fighting. I don't want to end up there. So that's not what I have in mind. Instead, what I have in mind is that combat is just like there's going to be that, remember there's the exploring a dungeon system, which basically includes a collection of understood verbs that might change throughout the course of the game as you've cleared off all of the areas and made them all, taken them all from the state of being unknown to known. You might not have the option to do open exploration anymore until you like unlock an unexplored area, right? Early on in the game, though, there's lots of exploration. So there's this, how do you traverse the dungeon system, which sort of progresses through what verbs are available based on the state that you've created through play. Combat can be a similar thing. So a combat encounter, like this chase sequence, is a uniquely coded thing, but drawing from a set of verbs common to all combat systems, or all combat encounters in the game. And that way it can indicate to you things that allow you to predict how different paths through the narrative are likely to succeed or fail, right? But it's still a narrative interface, and it's still ultimately a narrative type experience that you're getting. I don't want it to drop into 10 rounds of hitting each other and then you flee and enter a different mode. Whether you fight or flee from this combat encounter, the combat encounter continues, but it might continue with different consequences. It might get harder in different ways, right? In other combat encounters, fleeing might open up to you the option to explore the dungeon if you're able to get away from what you're fighting. But then fighting itself might not need to be this like, okay, exchanging blows kind of turn-based thing. It might be something that resolves a little more simply, or that at the very least in the midst of trying to unravel who's going to win the fight, it might also be able to inject other narrative things like dialogue trees might still exist and stuff like that, right? So the combat system becomes a set of verbs that are available, but the situation might still be pulling from other aspects of the game to create more options than what the combat system alone could give you, right? But point is, this is a strong hint of like, here is where you would build a combat system to make sense of this. So if you want to fight or run, that's two verbs pulled from the combat system, and the consequences here might be special to this particular fight sequence in some ways, but whether or not they succeed or not, like the consequences of this, if they succeed or fail, might be story related, but whether they succeed or fail might still be something that is somewhat more predictable, right? Stuff like that. So let's see. I could probably do this for another hour. I probably stream for another hour. That is. Where are we at? Have I gotten far enough to hit the fight button? Enter the dungeon. Enter the shimmering door. Take the amulet to return to the dungeon. Fight. Run. There we go. Okay. Again, I don't want to build out too much yet, so I'm going to follow the plot. Where did I leave my notes? Here they are. We got that. You've got to flee through the dungeon. So we're going to say that you have to do this to make progress in this skeleton version of the game. You know what I could do? I have that no-op. Right? Didn't I have no-op? Oh, I might have removed it. Let me just go through real quick. Take the amulet. Amulet of Yendor. Anywhere where I leave that, I'll put a no-op so that it forces me to return rather than just leaving a useless button, which would be... I mean... This will be, in a way, better, because it at least acknowledges that I didn't forget this button. It's not a bug, it just, I didn't finish the feature you tried to interact with. But hopefully I track this all down before I submit this. That would be good. So, Depths Amulet of Yendor, Halls of Madness. No op there. Free exploration. Hey, undefined BH. I can try resetting the stream with a higher source if that's intolerable. I was having the stream go down a couple hours ago, so I tried to cut back but maybe I overdid it, or maybe I didn't realize. I mean, I didn't specifically set 540p intentionally, but I suppose that might have been what the setting I was playing with did. I was just looking for ways to decrease it. Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to be co-working. That's kind of what I'm going for, because I'm just sitting quietly. Oh yeah, I did set it to IC 540. Yeah, I just grabbed it, turned it down to one of the 16:9 ratios that were a bit smaller. But the one good thing is, hopefully, even though it's rather low resolution, I also set it to 10 frames per second, which I can see on OBS. We're just looking at big, clear text most of the time on this, so you know, hopefully that if, as long as the text comes through, then low resolution video isn't going to be a problem. If it is a problem, then whoops, because that's how it's been for the last 2 hours. Enter the shimmering door. Take the amulet. You take the amulet of Yendor. The lights in the fibers dim, and in a few moments the chamber falls into darkness. The only light left is the light that emanates from the amulet. Let me spell check that. Emanates. Not emanates. Emanates. Has an A, not an I. Only the light that emanates from the amulet remains. Take the amulet. The lights in the fibers dim, and in a few moments the chamber falls into darkness. Only the light that emanates from amulet. From the amulet remains. Take the amulet. Only the light that emanates from the amulet remains. As you put the amulet around your neck, a blinding flash of light announces the arrival of an otherworldly being. It appears to be a man. I don't like that. I don't like that wording. It doesn't appear to be man. It has appearance like a man. It begins to glide. It begins to glide through the air towards you. It will be upon you in a few moments. That ends good. Dead end. Okay. So now it's time. Let's implement run. So run right now is going to take us to the final point, the final checkpoint in the story. Right. So let's take a step back. I was talking about the structure of a story engine as I want it to be in the future. One big thing it would do is it would mean that what I've done tonight, starting from the beginning of this story sequence, where I think where we started, I had the entrance to the dungeon, and we went from there and built in all the checkpoints of the major moments through the plot that sort of form the central trunk. And over time, I'm going to stitch things in between that makes it more of a game and more of a roguelike to achieve each of those checkpoints. So just like in a normal roguelike, how you would make progress, if you're playing Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, you make progress through 14 dungeon levels. At some point along the way, or 14 or something similar to that, some point along the way, you find the lair and you find the vault and you find, the Orcish mines and so on. Similarly, here, each of those is like advancement, is what I'm trying to get at, right? Each of those is a fixed progression forwards. This is doing the same thing. It's a fixed progression forwards, but it's using a little bit more story. The story is still a story of going deeper into the dungeon, in some senses, but the checkpoints here, like there's now like a possibility of presenting it as a puzzle, right? The even though the player's not solving a puzzle, the character is, right? The character, it's a story about a character presented with a puzzle, and you have to progress by solving the puzzle, and then by dealing with the Sentinel, which we completely skipped, and then by the time you get to the depths and you find the Amulet of Yender and take it, it's not a puzzle anymore. It's not about unlocking things, but it's a new kind of challenge. It's poised to tell the story of you running from a dungeon through a narrative interface, but still including all of the sort of procedural upcoming surprise that you could get out of a different genre, right? That's the hope. The problem is that I need an engine. I need a way to write all of this so that I could have just written the steps. I could have just said, like, here's what this step looks like. Take a look. Yep, I like how that feels. Here's what this step looks like. Stitch them together, and been confident that I could unstitch them and put stuff in the middle easily. Just sort of automatic, the way it works now to unstitch these things, I have to manually unlink them. The way I'm linking them together so easily, it's so brittle, it so easily includes mistakes. It's so easy to make mistakes along the way that I get a little nervous. Like, okay, I stitched this together. I don't want it to feel like this fixed. You just click to the next step of the story, next step of the story, next step of the story. So I'm gonna put stuff in between. have I actually will I actually be able to unstitch them? Well, technically, yes, I can in theory unstitch them, but how easy or hard is that going to be? I don't know. It makes me nervous. I would like to be able to say I just laid out the 5 story elements and said, okay, let's string them together for now, temporarily, just to play through that and see how it all fits together. But then we're going to unstitch it and put more in, and when it comes, it'll like the pieces will compose together in different ways in the final product. But it's important that along the way I can stitch them together in the wrong way just to see the flow as it exists so far, sort of, right? So that's something I can't as easily like just playfully move around when I'm doing this sort of hacked way, this low res pixel art style version. By pixel art, I don't mean I'm literally doing pixel art. By pixel art, I just mean the low res simplest thing that you can do by hand without a fancy tool. Okay. So, if you get out of the dungeon, so you take the Amulet of Yender and you start running and you succeed at making it all the way out of the dungeon, that's when this happens. And there's the final phase that I might add, but this is sort of optional. This would be a fine ending too. This would be an abrupt ending that would not tie elements from the story together, but it's an ending. It's a victory condition at the very least. And so what this victory condition is that you reach the stairs of ascension. So if you succeed down the story path of the run from here, then you achieve the stairs of ascension. And that state is the last one in the story that we need to sort of cap off this jam version of the game, this 7DRL version of the game. Okay. And so yeah, writing time. I need quiet. I need to think for a moment. What is the scene? You've been running. You've been being chased by these warrior angel creatures that are popping in trying to prevent you from reaching the surface with the amulet. When you reach the surface, you step outside. You've just passed through various layers of the dungeon that are, now familiar to you from your time passing through originally. And you get to the natural light of the sun out the door. But as you step out, the glow of the amulet sort of continues to illuminate the area ahead of you in an ethereal way, and you see another shimmering door, very similar to the one to the depths. And the shimmering door, this time inside of it, there is sort of an entire architecture of these shimmering shapes. and you see stairs that go up. So far I haven't introduced the name for these creatures that are chasing you. So I'm gonna leave it that way. Again, it's like, does the player know what this thing is, or do I describe it by appearance only? Like, there's this description by appearance. Do I just describe it by an epithet? Do I describe it by like its official label? And when you're writing, sometimes you make the decision about whether to do it one way or the other based on what you've revealed so far and when you intend to reveal more. So I think it would make sense for the engine to dynamically track the same sorts of things and to know, okay, if you're about to refer to something, you can ask, like, hey, which way am I allowed to refer to this thing so far? Does the player know its actual name? Does it know, have we established an epithet for it? Are we still on the basis of description? And then, depending on what level the player's understanding of this thing is at, write different passages for them to get them through this particular moment, right? All right, I want to add a language check here. Don't know if I'll get to add this feature to the game, but I want to add another language that you can't start with any of the paths, but that if you learn this language, it'll let you read a few snippets of text. Check player language. Okay, so right here we said check player language. I'm gonna generalize that one step. Up here where we have our game keys, I'm gonna add in game keys for the language now. Language, Alhebron, language. Astral. Okay. So when you do a language check, you have to specify a language. And so when we implement this, we take a look at the key, and for now the only language you can know is ancient Alhebron, which you know by playing the Amulet of Yender path. But maybe in the future I will have a more sophisticated language system, and so you might be able to learn other things. This could of course just become part of a more generalized knowledge system where we can say like check player knowledge, you know, language ancient Alhebron, language astral, whatever, get back an answer. Like we talked about that a little earlier, you know, check player knowledge, check player language is kind of just a special case of that idea. Now the other thing is, everywhere where I've used this so far, I wanted to encode the idea of checking for this language. That's how it relates to the story. But here on the Stairs of Ascension, the language check will be an astral language, astral, right? And then we'll say something like, if you don't know the language, then it'll say oops, that's what I would write for the other case. Again, reuse the text for glowing letters that you can't read. Forms writing the doorway. All right. There we go. Might not get a chance to add a full language system or, anything like that by the time this goes out to the people this week, but I might get there. It would be fun, and I at least want to be prepared because I'm going to be working on this past the week, and probably by the end of the month I will probably get to do that. So So the next thing I want to do is I want to put a what do you do And so for now, assuming I don't get a chance to add the 5th phase of my story plan, that's just it. You go to the Ascension. All right, let's go ascend. Here we go. Boom, boom, boom. Enter the door. Enter the shimmering door. Take the amulet. Run. Enter the shimmering door. Ascension. Okay. There we go. There's the whole plot for the Ascension. The whole path of the Ascension plot and its basic characters. Now, before I go and fill in all the story details, because there's a lot of story details I would like to have in there, but if I just do that, all I will end up with is a very fixed feeling, standard, choose your own adventure story game. So before I fill in more story details, I want to use that framework, and I still want to explore how this can become a roguelike, right? This is my second big day on the project. I've set up the engine on day 1. On day 2 here, I have filled out the framework of a run from beginning to end that succeeds, a winning run, a successful run. I've set out the framework, but it's just automatic. You get it for free, right? So now I want to start adding in the game resisting you, And the longer I spend on this, the harder it'll get. The more ways the game will have to resist you, and the more difficult the game will be. But these ways that the game resists you are what's going to make it feel like a roguelike. It's going to start throwing things at you that are recombinations of things you've experienced in new ways, and which, depending on how you choose to navigate through them, set you up to either have continued paths forward, or to eventually come to a dead end where there is no way to continue your journey, and your journey comes to an end before you ascend, right? So I'm going to stop here for today. I'm a little tired. I've plugged in the trunk of the story. What I haven't done yet is started turning it into a game that has game stuff. It's still just an interactive story thing. It's not a game in my mind, but I can turn it into a roguelike, I think, in the next day of work. I might not get to stream the next couple of days of the project. I got a little bit busy on Wednesday. I'm a little bit busy on Thursday. I might be able to stream if I do it early on Friday, but I might not. So it might not be until Saturday. I'll probably stream for sure. I think that's most likely, but I'm going to be working on this in the times when I can. So it might be a little while before anyone gets to see the next step. With that said, if you have enjoyed hanging out with me tonight, you can find out more about me and my projects at mrforth.com. You can find out about software I did. I've got my various YouTube related projects here. I have a podcast, lots of cool guests. You can sign up to my newsletter, and of course, if you come over here to my YouTube, I try to put out lots of useful programming information out here. So yeah, you can check that out. And let's finish up. I have a few viewers, so I'm gonna see if we can find. I'm gonna start by seeing if we can find any 7-day roguelike streams that are happening. There might not be any that are live. Nope, doesn't look like there are any that are live. So I'm gonna look and see if there are any story games. Can't find anything. It's probably it's probably kind of dead on Twitch this time of day, isn't it? I can't pro software and game development. Okay, software and game development has some stuff, but it's not easy to tell if any of this would be super interesting. Nothing pops out to me, at least, yet. Yeah, I think I'll skip the raid today. I'm not seeing anything that looks. I'm not seeing anything that looks up my alley just for the moment. So I'll just say goodbye. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys around the internet in the future. Bye.